Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Medill tonight. My name is Stacy Simpson, and I am the Associate Director of Special Events here at Medill. This evening, we have a great program, the Future of Business-to-Business Media, to present to you. And I would like, just for housekeeping purposes, to remind you, if you do have questions during our program, please enter those in the Q&A section at the lower part of your screen, and we will try to get to all those before the end of the conversation. I also want to encourage you, at the end of our program, you'll see a slide that gives you the website for the Medill Centennial Celebration. We have a wonderful website, and you can go there to see upcoming events and ways to visit our Centennial swag store and get involved. So I hope you'll take note of that at the end of the program. I'd like to first introduce our host tonight, Abe Peck. Abe is a professor emeritus-in-service for Medill. He's also director of business-to-business communications and senior director of the Media Management Center. So Abe, welcome to this evening's program, and I think you'll take it away from here.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here wherever here is. So, you know, as everyone knows, Medill's 100 years old, and I hope that trivia night was a rollicking good time, a good kickoff. Today, we're going to look at something a little different, a crucial aspect of journalism and communications, and even the global economy itself, B2B or business-to-business media. Whether you're a cardiologist or a chef or a chief marketing officer, professionals in industry decision makers use B2B media to gain the specific knowledge, highly specific knowledge they need to inform and improve their work. And whether through utilitarian content, thought leadership, or commercial transaction, B2B reporters, editors, publishers, and marketers become or collaborate with experts. They often convey, again, highly targeted information well before the general media do, and they move the merchandise to help provide vital supply chain information early and often. And B2B operations do this across media, including events, data, social, and video. Now, Medill plays a leadership role in this B2B world. We work with major associations and brands on everything from executive education to graduate classes, contest judging, to job placements, to research. And if you pardon me a plug, this summer I'll again run a short graduate class in which we'll collaborate with a media brand on a B2B solution. The class has attracted both journalism and IMC students. And thank you, if you're on, Marion Miner of EPG Specialty Media for working with us last time around. Medill has attracted attention for its B2B work. Most recently, we've created a scholarship with ASBPE, the American Society of Business Press Editors. Thank you, if you're on, Roy Harris, and congratulations to our Medill student recipients. Tonight, we're marking another B2B initiative, the McAllister Fellowships. For decades, alum Don McAllister, with his sister Leanne, has and continues to be a supporter of Medill's B2B explorations. More than 3 decades ago, yikes, we established the McAllister Top Manager Award to attract leading B2B executives to both journalism and increasingly IMC. The success of that program allowed us to expand to host a McAllister Top Editor, and Eliza Strickland, an editor at the award-winning IEEE Spectrum, will be visiting subsequently to discuss how to create excellent stories and other content. But that's for later. Tonight is about Tony Uphoff, our 2021 McAllister Top Manager. As president and CEO of Thomas, the parent company of Thomas.net, Tony has pioneered in transforming product sourcing and supplier information into the digital age. There, at other companies and as a consultant, he's moved B2B media forward in how it reaches the industrial and manufacturing markets especially. And as Tony will convey, that's becoming a light speed, high-tech transformation, and one with jobs, by the way. Tony, I want to thank you for joining our far-flung group in these disruptive times. But as you'll tell us, disruption is sometimes an opportunity for valuable change. Tony will present, and then we'll go into a Q&A. Stay tuned. We'll have a raffle in honor of Tony's virtual visit. Hint, hint, you have to be there to win. Tony, thanks so much. The screen is yours.
Hey, Abe, thanks very much. Let's see if I can first successfully share the screen. Great. Let me add my welcome as also, and I really want to take just a second and thank very much the McAllister family for their creation of the Top Management Fellowship Award. It is a remarkable honor. It is a bit of an awkward experience not to have the opportunity to come onto the campus and interact with the faculty and students. But again, I want to thank also Northwestern University Medill School of Journalism faculty, administrators, Abe, but most especially the students for joining this evening. When I graduated, I will tell you, I didn't leave saying, boy, I want to get involved in something called B2B media, or I want to get involved in something called business information. But if I actually look back at my career, and Abe has just touched on that, I have had a ringside seat at every major business transformation or technology transformation over the last 25 years. And it's been an absolutely thrilling and continues to be a thrilling career ride. So I hope that to a small extent, I might encourage many of you to pursue careers in business information. And I think you'll find not only does business information need more storytellers, nonfiction needs better storytellers than fiction, but we need more storytellers and people that can communicate and share an understanding of how to manage through the remarkable times that we're seeing in the industry. I'm going to take you on a brief journey of the transformation that our company, Thomas, has gone through. And like Medill, we are actually a company that is over 100 years old. So we're actually officially 125 years old as of this year. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of that history and how the company has transformed, and then use that as a springboard to talk about some of the trends that are fueling the industry today, and then focus it in on some of the things that I'd recommend that you might be looking at as you start to think about a career and where you want to go. But let's start our journey with the door. And specifically, I'm talking about the door behind me in that artificially posed president and CEO picture there. On my third day 4 years ago, when I joined Thomas, a family-owned company, one of the grandsons of the original founder had been serving as president and CEO. My third day, he opens that door to my office, points to a picture, oil painting of his grandfather on the wall, and says, "Hey, you got this. I'm going to warmer weather. It's snowing like crazy out in New York City." He said, "Call me if you need me." And then he knocked on that wooden door and then pointed to the picture of his grandfather again. I thought, well, I guess this is some sort of cultural ritual. We touch wood and point to a picture of the founder of the company when we say hello or goodbye. And he looked at me and he said, "Hey, this was the original door of my grandfather's first office." And he turned around and walked away. And I'm thinking, hey, no pressure, kid. Hey, no worries. You know, you take over the family business, and just to remind you, it's a family business. I'll let you know that this was my granddad's door. The company that Harvey Mark Thomas started 125 years ago was founded around a very straightforward concept. And the concept was that industrial buyers, people, engineers or procurement folks looking for products or suppliers needed a place where they could go to find those products and suppliers, and thus creating a two-sided marketplace. That directory created an avenue for those suppliers to be able to reach, engage, and to sell to in-market buyers. And it created a really remarkable company that has existed for obviously over 100 years. No, that is not Harvey Mark Thomas in that picture, but it is a picture that's representative of the type of technology that, believe it or not, was revolutionary in its day. And early on in 1923, to be exact, Harvey Mark Thomas moved Thomas into the current headquarters building in New York City at 34th and 8th. And he moved the company there because it was the only building at the time in New York City that had steel reinforced floors. Back then, that printer weighed multiple tons. And so he could control his own printing, which was a very innovative thing in its day. And directly across the street was the post office. So he could actually control, to a great extent, the speed of distribution and the quality of his printing. And again, by today's standards, we think, oh gosh, is that really innovative? It really was in its day. Through the years on the journey, the company continued to invest aggressively in technology and innovative ways of engaging, their audience and the suppliers looking to reach them. Many of you might not know what's on the screen right now. There was a transitional technology called CD-ROM technology, and it was kind of a bridge position between the print era and the online era as we know it today. And it allowed you to put a remarkable amount of information on a disk and then pop that disk into a computer and have some level of an interactive experience. In the mid-90s, Thomas was one of the very first companies to launch online with thomasnet.com. And today, we are now a remarkably modern data and platform company. And today, through all of these transformative steps, we have far more in common with a modern software company than we do with the legacy of a print-based company. Today, every second, an engineer or procurement professional or what's called an MRO sources a product or evaluates a supplier on thomasnet.com. And that happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Today, more people in a single day source suppliers on thomasnet.com than we're able to in an entire year in the print era. So it gives you a sense of the remarkable level of transformation we've gone through. But boy, just use that, less of an understanding about Thomas, but as where this industry has really started to move. And what I'd like to do is to frame out a discussion around those series of transformations and what's starting to happen, and more importantly, what these transformations are starting to enable. So that journey of our company from being a print directory business to a data and platform company, clearly over the last 20 years or so has been a series of digital transformations. And for many of you, boy, if anything, I think we overuse this term. Digital transformation is a little like ease of use. It's one of these terms that's kind of ubiquitous. And as a result, we don't always know what we mean when we say digital transformation. So let me see if I can use it as a bit more of a strategic framework. What I believe is happening, not just in the media business, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but in every business literally in the world right now is going through some phase of digital transformation. Today, we can hook literally anything and everything up to the internet. And that digital transformation has reached a tipping point where what it's now starting to enable is business model transformation. Because digital transformation in and of itself really doesn't accomplish anything unless it allows for some level of fundamental business transformation. And boy, can we see this happening in the media business. Today, media models are completely and utterly being redefined. And as both a student of, but a practitioner of media for my entire career, I will tell you, there has never, and I mean never, been a more exciting time to see what's happening in media as this really takes place. And what's fundamentally happening underneath all of this, if you just look at the enabling dynamic, it really is the convergence or fusion, I would argue, of media and software. And that convergence is actually accelerating. And in it, it is creating incredible opportunities. So many of the brands I'll use here as examples you would know quite well. Obviously, you would know YouTube. But if you look at YouTube, what it's doing is it's creating a remarkable opportunity for known brands. You can see some of them on the screen here, news brands, to accelerate, engage, expand their audiences, produce incremental content that maybe wasn't on air but would appeal to audiences. But at the same time, this remarkable software platform is enabling individuals to create coursework, YouTube channels, and to create unique original programming that frankly, they would never be able to do as cost effectively and to create an audience and to create a business, but they're able to with the remarkable use of this technology. Medium is another very, very popular platform that's accelerating in today's world in along the same dynamics. You see a lot of existing brands that are using Medium to engage new audiences, expand their reach or depth with existing audiences, but it's also allowing brand individuals, if you will, individuals. I blog regularly on Medium. I don't on ThomasNet, a lot of my interests around media and technology wouldn't naturally fit with a lot of the content and the data that we produce at Thomas. So I use Medium as a way to extend my professional engagement with various audiences out there. But probably the most remarkable example, recent example of digital transformation fueling a business model transformation is Disney Plus. So I don't know how many billions of dollars Disney has spent on digital transformation initiatives, either acquisitions, internet launches, a failed attempt to acquire Twitter, so many different digital transformation initiatives, and in all candor, not a whole lot to show for it until out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming. They developed an $8 billion a year streaming subscription-based service called Disney Plus. And they did it because digital transformation hit a point where it enabled business model transformation. And more powerfully, for Disney, and you're seeing this over and over again, what Disney Plus really did was to use the remarkable digital technology of streaming, but also combine it with the core competencies of filmed entertainment storytelling that Disney really understands how to do. And boom, you've got a ridiculously huge and scalable business that was fundamentally created in less than a year. So as the pace of this technology accelerates, and I want to be clear, when I say technology accelerating, I really mean two things, right? There are constantly new technologies being adopted, but as the adoption rate of that technology takes off, we're now seeing new business models that are really blurring the lines between media and commerce. And this has profound implications for all of you from a career point of view. You know, when I was coming up and I decided I really wanted to get into the media business, I had this creative urge. I wanted to publish. I wanted to be involved in that. There really weren't that many paths. There were really kind of three paths that you could look at, right? You could kind of come up through sales and marketing. You could come up through circulation, or you could come up through editorial. But the business models were fundamentally the same. And there was really a limited set of options that you have. The new business models today blurring, boy, does it open the doors for people that are exceptionally skilled and well-educated, certainly, around storytelling and how storytelling needs to happen today. Part of what you're also seeing as a result of these transformations is the rise, I could even argue, and Abe may have a point of view on this, the renaissance of subscription, non-advertising based models. So we talked about YouTube before, and that's certainly, taking off, and you can see people producing courses and paid programs and things like that. But you're also seeing platforms like Substack, where individuals can go on, or brands, and create paid newsletters overnight and not have to absorb the painful building out of infrastructure for the paid models themselves. They can leverage these remarkable platforms to be able to do so. You're also seeing a remarkable expansion of what a media brand is today into media products. So all these brands you would know, and many you would know very, very well. But if you start to look now at the business model transformation that's being enabled, where they're launching podcasts, video programming, television programming, movie programming, right? Based on the idea that they're now able to take what a lot of their core assets are and then move them into new business areas or new business models based on the digital transformation that they've been pursuing, hit a reasonable inflection. Okay, now, I've actually taken the step that I've actually written. It says trends here, but you could substitute stories. I actually have written your first 10 stories for you. So I've made your entree into your career and business information a little easier. I wouldn't say easy, but a little easier. And all kidding aside, I'm only half joking here. I want to take you through a series of trends that I think are stories that are just beginning and are going to be stories that need to be told over the next 10 to 15 years. And as Abe touched on before, these are phenomenons that will change, politics, economic environments, and business dynamics in ways that, we haven't even begun to imagine yet. So the first one I want to touch on is automation. And For most of us, we think of automation as this kind of dirty, grimy manufacturing. We don't know much about it because it's pretty removed from who and what we are. We are seeing an absolute mind-boggling renaissance in manufacturing, particularly here in North America and the United States. But the advanced manufacturing technology, and particularly the interactive automation. What interactive automation, what I mean by that is man plus machine, human plus machine interaction, adaptive technology is revolutionizing manufacturing as we know it. And we're just beginning to see where this can go. And boy, that's a story that is just going to be remarkable story to tell over the next 10 to 15 years. All of you are familiar, at least at these early stages, about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And in many cases, we've been talking about these remarkable technologies for a while. It makes it feel like, they're kind of old news. Well, while they've been around for a while, they're just now taking root, and we're understanding how to harness the remarkable power of these technologies. This story as well, though, has a lot of subtlety and nuance to it. We need to make sure we know how to responsibly deal with these technologies. And that's a story that needs on an ongoing basis to be told and retold and examined and understood. What regulatory issues do we need to deal with? What does artificial intelligence mean about the future of some types of works and industries? So lot of opportunity there. We used to use the term when we talk about jobs, we'd break them into two categories that we would refer to as either white collar jobs or blue collar jobs. Those terms are irrelevant today. And I actually use the term new collar jobs to define the kind of jobs that are being created today. So they're a combination of high-tech technology and data analytics skills combined with perhaps the skills of a domain like manufacturing or any sort of product development or service. And the story of understanding what are the skill sets, what are the educational requirements, what are the apprenticeships, what are the ways that we start to prepare young people, but also companies in our society for these new types of jobs that are being created. Reshoring, and if you're not familiar with what reshoring means, it means exactly what it sounds like. It is the reshoring of manufacturing back to North American and particularly American shores. And what has happened, this has slowly but surely been accelerating over about the last 10 or 15 years. Most recently during the pandemic, because of the supply chain failure that was at the center of the pandemic, you've seen a dramatic acceleration. This matters for a couple of different reasons. First, North American manufacturing is facing the biggest market opportunity that they've seen in 70 years. So it's a dramatic business story that's a very positive one. But there's a series of subsets, including a re-examination of the original thesis that drove a lot of outsourcing and offshoring in the 70s, and including many people that are starting to investigate that and realize not only was the math horribly flawed, it actually had some unintended consequences that were really damaging, particularly to U.S. economy. So lot of opportunity to think about reshoring and how we might tell those stories. I mentioned before that at the heart of the pandemic is really a supply chain failure and disruption. Give you a couple of interesting perspectives here. Many of us didn't know what PPE stood for before the pandemic. Boy, we sure know now. Here's the height of irony though. What most people didn't realize too was that 85% of surgical masks and surgical gloves and surgical gowns come from a 300 square mile radius of Wuhan, China. Gee, what's wrong with that picture, right? And this is not anything to do with China or any other country. The reality of it is the world woke up and realized, oh, boy, that's probably problematic. If we have a supply chain that could be disrupted around something that is that critical, and now we need to re-examine that. What's happening since then is literally every company in the world is reevaluating their supply chain, whether it was disrupted or not. This is the ultimate wake-up call. So that's the first part of the story that's kind of interesting and getting a lot of attention. The second part of the story I'd use Tim Cook to tell. Tim Cook, as I'm sure most of you know, is the CEO of Apple. He's done an absolutely remarkable job of accelerating the strategy of Apple after the death of the legendary founder, Steve Jobs. What a lot of people don't realize is that Tim Cook is not an engineer. He's not a product designer. He's not a software engineer. He's not a software programmer. He's an absolute world-class genius at supply chain management and logistics. Steve Jobs plucked him from an obscure and now defunct computer company called Compaq Computer when he had the vision for wanting to build these remarkable devices, but knew if he didn't have the supply chain logistics and the talent of a Tim Cook, he'd never be able to fulfill on these products and services at scale. So Tim Cook is arguably the first supply chain rock star that we can turn to, but he's certainly not the last. So the story here is supply chain and logistics going from kind of a back office function to a strategic front office story. The changing nature of the workforce. So as of 2017, the second largest generation ever created in history, the millennial generation, was of equal size of the first largest generation ever created, the baby boom generation, in the workforce at the exact same time. This is creating a really fascinating series of demographic trends. First off, we now have the broadest demographic stretch in the history of business. It's never happened before, but it's also changing the way companies operate. So the millennial generation, as most of you would be very aware, doesn't remember a world without the internet. They're digital natives. They're not afraid of technology. They didn't worry that they might break something if they engage with a piece of technology where perhaps an older generation had those experiences. Conversely, the baby boom generation is motivated by the millennial generation, and perhaps there's some mentoring going on, but we don't even know where that story ultimately goes, but it's a fascinating changing nature of the workforce itself. Alternative energy gets talked a lot about, but the real truth of it is we're only in the first inning of where alternative energy can go. And we tend to, in thoughtful environments like Northwestern and the Medill school, we talk about these things like they're commonplace. Alternative energy is still called alternative. And there will become a time where alternative renewable energy will no longer be the alternative. It will be the norm. And again, this is a story that's going to play out in so many different areas and has just remarkable levels of consequence and just a drama, frankly, to the story itself. So this is another area that I think is ripe for storytelling. With all of the digital transformation, and the reality of it is everybody and every company is a digital company today. Cybersecurity is increasingly critical. The odds that we're going to fight a physical war of scale in the future, boy, I hope are low, and I would imagine they'd be low, but we're fighting wars constantly around cybersecurity. Our governments around the world are hacking each other. We're seeing all kinds of challenges around companies, dealing with all kinds of cybersecurity issues. And again, here too, we're at the early stages of this, and these stories need to be illuminated. They need to be told. We need to understand what's happening in some of these areas to help, companies and people and businesses manage through them. Big data and analytics, it used to be not that many years ago that data was a survey instrument, and it was a trailing indicator. So think of it this way: you'd get something that happened. We'd be here in the first quarter of 2021, but we'd be looking at data that was the fourth quarter of 2020. And we'd be trying to understand what happened in that quarter. And could we learn enough about what happened in that quarter we could apply perhaps in this quarter or in subsequent quarters? What's really changed through the remarkable ability to manage massive amounts of data and put it into analytics, we're now at the stage where we can look at real-time data, not trailing indicator data, and start to spot patterns in real time. A few things I'd mention here. Thomas is an example. Thomasnet.com, we're up to 3.5 petabytes of buyer behavior data and growing. So we have this remarkable window into the industrial economy. We've now taken that, which is in essence the digital exhaust from our core business, and we've turned it into a business in and of itself called Thomas Industrial Data that sells data patterns into high-end financial institutions that are looking at broad market trends. So tremendous opportunity here. One other thing I would mention here, the story of the vaccines that have been so remarkable to see as those stories get told. Hopefully some of you will help tell those stories. What you're going to find is that at their core, they're going to be a big data story. And what that means is the remarkable compression of time. It used to take a decade to develop a vaccine, was done in 10 months. Part of that is the ability to have access to remarkable amounts of data, churn that data very, very quickly and produce analytics. The future of work. Look what we're doing right here, right? So had the pandemic not happened, we'd be all together. And we'd be at some beautiful building on the campus and we'd be interacting. And boy, I really wish we were. But there are also other things from the pandemic that are showing us that they've accelerated the trends of much more of a hybrid work model, a combination of remote and office work. I also think too, for me, as a professional, I would say on average over the last 25 years, I've probably averaged somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 air miles a year, untold number of hotel, nights, a remarkable amount of time sitting in airports waiting for a plane, waiting for a delay, canceled flight. If I add up all of the time it takes to do the value, which is to get to a destination to work with customers or work with employees, the reality is the 90% of it is wasted and really unproductive to get to the 10%. What we're learning here is, boy, I can cut out that 90%. And that's a radical change. I can visit with, since the pandemic, I've probably visited with several hundred customers. If I wanted to do that physically, which was the traditional model, boy, it would take me quite a while to be able to do that. I'm not saying it's either or, but we have a whole new narrative around the future of work. And your generation has the opportunity to kind of choose your future. And I don't want to say my generation didn't, but boy, a lot of these transitions around the future of work, again, this story hasn't been written, and you have the opportunity to help write this story, but also help others understand how to think through what's that future of work really going to look like. Before we open it up to questions, I want to spend just a minute talking about you and career options. So for generations of folks that came out of journalism schools, who came out of programs where they wanted to go work at a magazine or work at a television company or in business information, you really, as I said before, you kind of had one path, and you had to kind of work your way through that path. And you had to, if you aspired to management or you aspired to become a byline writer, you had to kind of pay your dues, and you had to work through some of those types of things. Your generation is coming out into a world where the technology, the convergence of these technologies, and the business models that are emerging are going to give you the opportunity to have it all if you choose to. So I hope you come to work at companies like Thomas for Industry and help us continue to serve the markets. Perhaps you go to work at a Washington Post or Reuters or Bloomberg or the New York Times. But even if you do those things, you also have a remarkable ability today to be a brand individual. You can have your own space on Medium. You could launch a paid newsletter on Substack. You could have coursework or other paid programs, or just an area of interest and passion that you might express via a YouTube channel. So I would really encourage you, as we segue here to the questions, two things. Take a very broad look. There is not one path for you to go down in terms of a career. Every company in the world today needs to do a better job of telling their stories and developing an audience, which is exactly what you've been trained to do and why you got involved in what you're involved in. So the world, it really is your oyster. I know a lot of people say that, but it is. The other thing I would mention is, if you're not already leveraging some of these platforms and some of these technologies, start. Take advantage of it. Make sure you're leveraging all of them, because the folks that are going to open up all these career opportunities are the folks that have that sense of convergence themselves. They get the dynamics. They know how to write. They have the background and the education to be a really effective journalist, but they understand the power of the software and data and analytics. So I'm sure you're doing that, and many of you are studying those components, but take advantage of those things and don't be afraid of it, because I really am so excited for this era that we're living in, but particularly for your generation, because I think you're going to go on and have the experience that I've had over the last 25 years. You're going to be at the ringside seat for every major business transformation and technology and societal transformation over the next 25 years. So with that, let me, if Abe's still with us, and by the way, please reach out if I can help any of you, or you want to continue our dialogues or conversations. I'm pretty active on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and I also posted my email address there as well. And again, I'll finish by thanking Medill and Northwestern and Abe, and I also want to give another shout out to the McAllister family, and also my friends at Connective, the trade association that works so closely with them on the nominations and awarding of the fellowship.
Right. So I don't know if I'm on Tony, can you hear me?
I can, Ed.
Oh, great. Okay, good. So we have a couple of questions, but I'm going to, and then what a shocker, they revolve around jobs, and but they also revolve around knowledge. The first one is, what skill profile do you look for? I mean, I know there's different jobs and different posts, but what really, if someone walks in with, will give people an edge?
Yeah, what a great question. There's tangibles and intangibles. So let me start with the tangibles. Abe, I think today, at any age or any job, what we look for is people that have a high level of technical understanding and technical skill, and a high level of facility with data and analytics. And when I say technical skill, I'm not talking about a software programmer. We have engineers and software developers, but I'm talking for journalists we have, or content folks that we have. We want them to understand how to use the latest systems. We want them to be able to understand how to develop a Google Studios dashboard for data and analytics. We want them to be facile with understanding how to use data and those types of things. So I think today there's a little bit of a lift, and I don't think we're unique, Abe, in that regard in terms of business information. You want them to have a reasonable technical skill at some of those things, and so I think those are the tangibles, and then obviously having, experience if it's required for the job, and those types of things. I think on the intangible side, we actually spend more time interviewing for the intangibles than we do for the tangibles. Tangibles are obvious in a resume. On the intangible side, there's kind of three things that we're really looking for. One is innate curiosity, because it's really hard to create that. People either have it or they don't. And I can rightfully so be accused of being a geek about business information. I'm just genuinely curious in business. I'm curious in people, and it shows. And I think it's hard to manufacture that. So if you've got that, and I would assume if you're an aspiring journalist, you want to showcase that. I think the other thing is understanding collaboration, and collaboration is sort of a, it's an ethereal term in some regards, but business, no matter what you do, is a team sport. The days of this isolated, frustrated journalists that go off and just, break a story on their own, and they, yell and scream at their editor-in-chief, and those are movies. Those aren't real. Today it's a collaborative effort, and you want people that are, high level of curiosity, but people that do know how to work with other people and collaborate, right? And then the last one, Abe, we use a slightly different term than the one I'm going to use, but get things, we substitute a different word for things, done. We want people that get things done. That's, again, nothing I've said is unique, Abe. I think this is true for every company, but curious, high on the collaboration score, and ability to get things done. They're not waiting to be told what to do. They can break glass and move the process forward.
Okay, we got a question. What publications, online or print do you see as doing the best job writing about these kinds of transformations that you're describing?
Boy, it's not a publication. It's interesting, and I'm not trying to be clever in saying this. I think some of the best stuff I find on writing about business transformation and where the world's going, I find via Twitter, and I curate based on individual and people. I think one of the first brands that came to mind is a website and a podcast called The Knowledge Project, and it's run by a guy named Shane Parrish. And I think he's doing some of the most seminal thinking about business frameworks, mental models, performance, both personal and professional. I think he's just doing absolutely remarkable work, and I find it really well done, rigorously researched, and written well. And it's not just in the written word. There's podcast and video programming. My personal feeling is a lot of the traditional business brands, Business Week, Fortune, Forbes, have gotten really sleepy and tired. And I hope I'm not offending anybody here. I just don't find them relevant. Most of them are trying to figure out in an online world of clickbait how their business model really operates. And they haven't figured out what the New York Times figured out, which is to have the segue over into really a paid sub model. And unfortunately, a lot of the content online has become about the monetization of rage or clickbait. And so I think a lot of the kind of traditional business press is really lost right now. I think they're struggling quite a bit. I think some of the niche brands are really interesting that have filled the void. And I think Business Insider, they recently changed their name to Insider, I think is doing a very clever job. And I think they produce a lot of really thoughtful, well-researched, well-thought-through content. So those are a couple, Abe, that come to mind. I also think there are individual columnists that I think have done a brilliant job of creating that brand-individual sensibility. Matt Tiabi is one who I think has done a particularly good job of that, and he writes very well, a little on the snarky side. There's a professor at NYU Stern School who's become quite popular as an author, blogger, and podcaster, a guy named Scott Galloway, who I think is probably one of the best business thinkers really in the world right now. He also has the ability to write the way he speaks, and he's incredibly snarky and funny. So there's a benefit there. He'll entertain you along with writing some really thoughtful, thought-provoking business content.
Great. Actually, I do want, at the end, I want to get back to the jobs question, but we're getting some other questions that are quite interesting. So one is, how do you build relationships with sources in B2B media? And if you can answer this, is it different than consumer journalism?
I can't. It's a great question, and so let me try to answer the second part of that. If it's different than consumer journalism, I actually really don't think so. I think the difference in business information is you probably have less off the record contacts. Of people saying, well, hey, I'll serve as a contact for you, but I want to be off the record, or those types of things. I think that's the case. I'm not completely sure that is the case. But I think those relationships are based on, and it sounds trite to say, they're really based on trust. And I know, for instance, at Thomas, given the data that we have, which is really this remarkable insight into the industrial economy, as a way of transforming the brand image of the company, we started to take that data and turn it inside out. And we produce a weekly video called the Thomas Index Report that basically takes what's happening in that data in just very brief 90-second video. Abe, as we started to do it, and I think you and I have talked about this before, we started to get all kinds of companies reaching out. Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, every financial place you can imagine. And it started to create relationships. where they say, well, gosh, I really don't have data to source the story on reshoring, or I had never really had data on what was happening in manufacturing or what was happening in the steel industry. And given all the data we have, we started to serve as sources of those, and that led to appearances on CNN and CNBC and those types of things, which is really good for us. Many of those relationships, all hear, or our PR people will hear very directly. I had somebody from Associated Press on deadline Friday at 6 o'clock Pacific, and I think she's East Coast. Reach out under deadline, and was doing a story around the difficulty of sourcing PPE for local hospitals. And I'll be honest, had the relationships not been developed, had I not known her, had I not known of the thing, I probably would have blown right by it. And I probably wouldn't have answered it. But I knew that this is serious, and I knew the quality of journalism they were doing. So long way of saying, work on the skills to develop those relationships. Burn sources at your peril. Mm-hmm. So, be careful about, if somebody says something's embargoed, be careful of violating that, because you're probably not going to get the chance to violate that more than once. But those relationships should be the lifeblood of the give and take of that. The other thing I would encourage you to do, and I'm sure you're studying this, work on your skills as an interviewer, mm-hmm. even if you're not interviewing people. Because it's really, really hard to interview people and to get something unique out of them and to get insights out of them. Most people in business today are so pitch trained, myself included, so on message, that it's hard to get kind of a unique quote out of them. And so it oftentimes takes somebody who can really interview somebody in a conversational style to get something unique out of their mouth that might really help you with your story.
I just want to add, 2 years ago, a consulting client of mine called my bluff, and I became editor of a niche magazine in B2B. I'm telling the group, Inside Unmanned Systems, which covers autonomous vehicles. And what I found is, first of all, it's a big publicity apparatus, which of course could be a whole other discussion of. And you want to find the ones that are still working for their company, but are on your side in terms of getting a good story. They may not want to write an expose, but at least something that conveys the information. And then these are communities. In some ways, B2B is like, some of them are massive, but they're like, some of them are more like small towns in a way. We have a 20,000 circulation in print, with much bigger circulation digitally. And you'll find out who the mayor is, and you'll find out who the sheriff is, and you'll find out who the person that's is your neighbor. I think that you find, if you can learn enough, at least on the fly, maybe it's fake it till you make it, to give people that you respect what you're covering, people will really open up to you and put their virtual arm around you, and kind of give you what you need. There also may be an internal mentor that can guide you too.
Yeah, Abe, such great points. One thing, just picking up on that, I'd mention is, the same dynamic in B2B that happens in the consumer marketplace, they're influencers. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not on Instagram as much as consumer influencers are, but they're influencers that in many cases have wicked amounts of power in these markets. They can be in academia, they can be within companies, they can move around in those markets, but they're people with knowledge and understanding of markets, and they've seen market transitions. That, that's a really good point, Eb. As you get to know these individual markets, you kind of learn who those influencers are, and they can be super helpful in developing insights and to providing access oftentimes into other parts of the market for a journalist.
So we have another question here, picking up right off your presentation. I think the brand individual question, a concept you brought up, is really fascinating. What are some of the benefits to being a brand individual?
I think it's twofold. I think, this is probably an answer you think I'm not about to give, because you think I'm going to say something like, or perhaps you would think I would say something like, well, it opens up more career opportunities and positions you for your next job and all those types of things. And there is some truth to that. I think it keeps you fresh. And I think what it does is it allows you to reinvigorate yourself. If your day job is your day job, and it's how you earn your living, you don't want to violate that. You don't want to violate that, pardon me. But I also think at the same point in time, you can do related things that keep you creatively fresh. You can experiment with new technology as a brand individual. You could create a newsletter, you could create a podcast, you could do different things. And I think by expressing some of that and exploring some of that technology, I think it makes you better at your core job. So that's one component piece to it. It does give you visibility too. I started blogging and creating more of a presence on social media very early. I was an executive at a business technology company, and I was trying to get our journalists to embrace blogs and social media. And I thought, well, gosh, I'm kind of telling them what they should do, and I'm not doing it. And so I started doing that back in 2006. And it raised my visibility. I started to get asked to speak at events. I started to, engage in areas and communicate with people that really accelerated my education and learning curve in certain markets. So that's another side benefit that I would suggest to it as well.
Okay, we have one more question and then the jobs question, and we want to leave a little time for Stacy at the end. This is actually an interesting question in these times. How do you recommend balancing your day job with creating extra things to help you get that next better job? So this is the job segue.
Boy, if you figure that one out, let me know. I think, and I'm not saying this as the president and CEO of a company. I'm saying this as an employee as well. If you're going to take the paycheck, you have to do the job. And there are jobs I've had where I could tell I was starting to get towards the end of my time there. I just had done everything I could do there. And I always can tell that by how much I listen to outside opportunities. And I've taken the strategy on that when that moment in time comes, I need to be open about it. Because I'm not good at having that kind of, let me pretend I'm going to go to work at this other company, but I'm not really sure while I'm taking a paycheck, and I've got to lie to somebody that I'm out on an interview and all that kind of stuff. I'm just not very good at that. And so I took the stance of, when that time comes, I'm going to be fairly transparent about that. Now, that being said, that's not always an option that's available to people. And so I think as long as you can do the job that you're paid to do, and then use the framework, whether it's paid time off, and I hope I'm answering the question that you're actually asking here, use paid time off or your personal time to explore other opportunities. One of the things that I did early in my career, before I was sure I was going to maybe look at a different company, I used to schedule coffees or get together with a drink with somebody that worked at a different type of company. And I was just exploring, God, I wonder what that's like. I wonder, what's going on. And sometimes it led to something and sometimes it didn't. But I tried to be always disciplined about doing that in the off hours, if you will, of the job that I was getting paid for. You want to be a little cautious here. And again, I hope I'm hitting the bullseye here on the question you were asking. These are small worlds, as Abe said. We're out in California now, but we live in the Upper West Side of New York City. New York City is 8 million people, but boy, it feels like a small town often. And, I've lost count of how many times I'm out, with my wife for dinner and I see somebody I work with, or I used to work with, or whatever. So, I think if you have a job and you want to start looking at that next job, you just want to be careful in the way that you do it, because, reputations take a long time to build, as the cliche goes, but they can take minutes to rip apart. And you want to be stand up about it. And I have people that, that have come to me and said, hey, I just got to be clear. I think my time is done here. And I've kind of started interviewing, and they've handled that conversation so well. While I was disappointed, I respected the way they handled that. And frankly, some of those I've worked with again. So again, I hope I'm answering that question, Abe, the way it was intended to be delivered.
We have a last question. We're going to have to be quick because, and I'm going to chime in after you go, because we do want to save Stacy a little time. So the question really revolves around, so here's B2B. A lot of students have no reason to really even know about B2B, especially if they're younger, because, maybe they haven't had the jobs in the field, and these aren't newsstand publications, whatever a newsstand is these days. Or big digital brand.
What is this newsstand you speak of? Yes,
exactly right. So the question, I guess I'm going to expand this to a two-parter, and you can answer both, and then I'll shoot the wounded after you go, I guess. One is, how can industry do a better job of reaching out to a student pool of very good students like we have? And the other part is, how can students learn more about B2B or business information from their jobs?
Yeah, such a great question. And I mentioned before a trade association called Connective, and it's going through some transitions right now, but it's affiliated with the McAllister Fellowship. And that trade association is over 100 years old. And like a lot of trade associations, it's gone through some ebbs and flows and it's reconstituting itself. But when I was a young, professional coming up, those trade associations, either local or national, were incredibly helpful in helping me understand, what the landscape looked like and how to learn more about it. And unfortunately, I don't have a simple answer to your question. I think, I think we as an industry could do a far better job of opening the door here. Before we started today, Stacy and Abe and I were talking about, you all, as graduate students and going into the workforce, and we were talking about where business information or B2B storytelling skills, journalism skills are applied today. And an example I gave, as I was saying to Stacy, Amazon has 800 people in their corporate communications department. Well, you think of Amazon as this e-commerce logistics company. Jeff Bezos and the team, you probably read this before, they don't use PowerPoint. They're very much on the narrative. They're very much on the storytelling. And so a lot of what Amazon has done, both internally and externally, is to create a narrative and to write that narrative and to clarify that narrative and then execute against that narrative. You wouldn't think of Amazon as a place where you would say as a journalist, well, gosh, what's the opportunity for me at Amazon, right? And I think there's just so many different avenues. But, Abe, and I hope you have an answer to the question. I think as an industry, it pains me that we don't have kind of an organizing mechanism to help young people understand what this business information industry is about and the myriad of opportunities. You could work for a brand, you could work, and by brand, I mean a product brand that needs journalists. You could work for a media brand. You could do so many different things. But Abe, maybe you've got some advice there that would be helpful.
I have some bullet points, I guess. One is, we've been able to, thanks to the McAllister Fellowship, we've been able to build a bit of a coalition of the willing, where some faculty were willing to talk about B2B or have me in or have our fellows in. And that's been a plus. There's some interest on the IMC side about starting a little bit of a B2B concentration. In terms of where people can go, I think corporate websites often post jobs. I think if you find the vertical you like, Tony talked about curiosity. I would also add passion. If you're really into cars, or you're really into fashion, or you're really into whatever, follow those verticals, not just the publications, but the influencers and the websites of brands that you really like. For example, Vogue started a B2B magazine now because fashion is such a big business. I think the influences you mentioned, the social media is pretty powerful there. My email is a-peck at northwestern.edu. I'm happy to talk to people after. I've done a general job session. I'm happy to do it again for both consumer and business. Obviously you're interested in this, and obviously we're here to help.
Yeah, Abe, I would just add, I think LinkedIn has become, I think it's easy to goof on LinkedIn, and there are some components to the user interface that I think need a remarkable amount of work. But putting all that aside, it is an effective medium for connecting people. And I don't know how many reach outs I get, on a daily basis on LinkedIn. Once I wade through the ones that are simply trying to sell me something that our company doesn't have an application for, there are oftentimes either students or others that are looking for context or perspective. So I'd recommend that as another conduit. And I know I sometimes talk on at universities about starting to think about those types of things, and LinkedIn is a good way. Start to reach out and connect with groups. Find out who who the companies are that have the types of jobs that you're interested in, get to know who the heads of human resources are, who the hiring managers are. Most of that's pretty easy to find on LinkedIn today.
And also, I would say there's one more group that we haven't talked about in terms of all this stuff, which is student peers. We talk about news from below. The people on this webinar who are students, you have a network. And one of the great things about Medill is that people don't pollute each other's lab specimens. It's not a competition. And you guys generically can really support each other and work, both working with career services, but also supporting each other in terms of your own quests. You're probably a little less competitive than you even might think, because some of you want to go to the East Coast, some of you want to go to China. And but you're a team, and I think you can act like that. So Tony, I think we have our hour done. I just want to thank you very, very much for a very thoughtful presentation. I want to thank you on behalf of the school, on behalf of the McAllisters, it's been a pleasure working with you, and I hope we can continue doing that. So thank you very, very much, and cue the virtual applause, and then we'll bring Stacy on.
Abe, thank you, and thanks to everybody again.
Right, Stacy?
Yes, thank you, Tony. That was a terrific program. And thanks everybody for attending tonight. Just want to remind you that there are a handful of lucky winners who registered for our program tonight. And because you registered and you showed up, you will be receiving a $25 Grubhub gift certificate. So we hope you enjoy a nice hot meal or two on behalf of Medill. And also just a final reminder to please visit 100.medill.northwestern.edu to learn more about our centennial celebration, learn tons of interesting facts about Medill and its 100-year history, and get some good Medill swag so you can also have this beautiful logo hanging around your own home. So thanks so much, gentlemen. Everybody stay safe and warm wherever you may be, and we will look forward to seeing you next time.
And thank you very much, Stacy.
You're welcome. Good night,
Thank
guys.
you, Stacy.
Take care.